My name is Princess Laila bint Fahd. I am a daughter of the House of Fahd, born into one of the oldest branches of the Saudi royal line. And on 4th April, 2021, when I was 29 years old, the kingdom signed my death warrant. Not for reading a forbidden book, but for preaching it, openly, boldly, secretly, dangerously, inside the most tightly controlled religious state on earth. I was sentenced to execution by sword. But Jesus, my Savior, my Defender, the one who called me by name, had a plan for my life no one in my family, my captors, or even I could have imagined. This is the testimony I never expected to survive long enough to share. Before I continue, please do well to subscribe to this channel, like and comment where you are watching me from. As you do so, may you enjoy God's divine mercy in Jesus' name. Let's continue. I was born into a world most people can only imagine. White limestone palaces, hallways with solid gold door handles, private tutors from Europe, and nearly 30 servants who anticipated my needs before I spoke to them. Every step I took was shadowed by security. Every choice I made was monitored. People assumed I lived a dream. But even dreams can become prisons. Because luxury can cradle the body and suffocate the soul. From childhood, my life was shaped by strict religious discipline. I memorized prayers before I understood their meaning. I learned recitations delivered with perfect pronunciation, flawless tone, but none of them ever reached the hollow places in my heart. The unspoken rule was clear. Do not question. Do not doubt. Do not seek. But I did all three. I always felt something missing, something deeper than rituals, something more alive than repetition. And the older I became, the heavier the chains grew. At 18, the kingdom assigned me a full-time female guardian to monitor everything I did. What I wore. What I read. Who I spoke to. Every website I visited. I lived in unimaginable privilege. Yet my spirit lived behind bars. Ask yourself this. Have you ever felt trapped in a life others would envy? That was my daily reality. Yet I didn't know that everything would change at 27, 30,000 feet above the desert, in a storm no pilot saw coming, when a voice I had never heard before whispered my name and rewrote my destiny. But to understand why that single whisper shattered my world, you need to understand the world I came from. I was born into the House of Fahd, a lineage older than many nations. People heard royal family and imagined crowns, silk, and sparkling privilege. And yes, there were palaces carved from white limestone, with chandeliers imported from Vienna and floors so polished they mirrored your steps. I grew up surrounded by nearly 30 servants who moved like quiet ghosts, anticipating my needs before I voiced them. I had private tutors from Europe who taught me French literature, Western history, and mathematics with a precision that bored me long before it enlightened me. Security guards shadowed my every movement, a silent reminder that even as a child, my life was not truly my own. From the outside, my childhood looked perfect. People envied us, envied me, but they never saw the invisible bars around my heart. Privilege is not peace. Wealth is not freedom. And power cannot quiet the aching emptiness inside a soul. I learned that truth long before I had the words to describe it. My religious upbringing began almost as soon as I could speak. Dawn after dawn, I sat cross-legged on embroidered cushions while tutors drilled verses into me with unyielding discipline. I memorized prayers I didn't understand, recited passages with flawless rhythm, and performed the rituals expected of a daughter of our house. Everything had to be perfect. Every recitation, every gesture, every breath between words. But inside, I felt nothing. The prayers were beautiful, but they felt like echoes, hollow, distant, disconnected. I would bow, kneel, repeat. Yet my mind whispered questions I was terrified to voice. Why does this feel empty? Why do I feel no connection? Why am I forbidden to seek? The unspoken rule was louder than any lesson. Do not question. Do not doubt. Do not look beyond the walls built around you. Still, I always did. There was a hunger in me I could never name, a tugging somewhere deep in my chest, the quiet, persistent sense that something essential was missing from all the rituals, all the rules, all the perfection. And the older I grew, the heavier that hunger became. At 18, the invisible cage became literal. The kingdom assigned me a full-time female guardian, a woman whose presence was as constant as my own shadow. She controlled everything: what I wore, what I read, who I spoke to, every website I visited, every moment I stepped outside my bedroom. She was not unkind, but she was unmovable, a living wall placed between me and the world, between me and freedom, between me and myself. It was around then that the restlessness inside me shifted from a whisper to a roar. A rebellion without noise, without words, a silent cry for something real, something true, something that could fill the void none of my luxuries could touch. Even surrounded by palaces, servants, tutors, and titles, I felt profoundly, utterly alone. My world looked like a kingdom, but my soul lived in chains. And I had no idea that the first crack in those chains would come thousands of feet above the desert, in a moment that would change everything I believed about God, destiny, and myself. I was 27 the night everything shifted, the night the first crack split through the walls I had lived behind my entire life. We were flying back from a charity event in Dubai, a routine trip, the kind I had taken dozens of times before. Our royal jet cut smoothly through the darkness, the desert below a black ocean of emptiness. Then, without warning, the aircraft lurched. At first it was a shudder, subtle, almost dismissible. Then came the violent drop. The lights flickered. The cabin shook as if the sky itself were tearing open. Passengers screamed. Masks fell from the ceiling like pale, dangling ghosts. My heartbeat roared in my ears. I gripped the armrest and began muttering the prayers I'd memorized since childhood, the ones I could recite in perfect cadence, the ones that always felt like echoes rather than answers. But in the midst of that chaos, something happened that had never happened to me before. A whisper, quiet, steady, unmistakably intimate, rose inside my chest, cutting through the panic like a blade of light. Laila, do not be afraid. I am with you. It wasn't my voice. It wasn't memory. It wasn't imagination. It was like someone had leaned close enough for their breath to touch my spirit. And instantly as a candle snuffed out, the terror evaporated. Peace flooded me so completely, I thought for a moment I was dreaming. Not calm. Not distraction. Peace. Deep, anchoring, impossible peace in the middle of a moment where everyone around me thought we were about to die. Minutes later, the turbulence eased. The jet steadied. People cried, prayed, thanked God, clung to each other. But I sat frozen, my fingers still trembling on the armrest, my pulse slow and strangely steady. It wasn't the turbulence that had shaken me. It was the voice. That night, back at the palace, I couldn't sleep. My guardian assumed I was exhausted from travel, and left me alone for once. The silence of my room pressed around me like a held breath. I reached for a hidden browser on my phone, an app I'd installed years earlier to bypass monitored internet. My hands trembled as I typed the only question that had mattered since the moment I stepped off that plane. Who says, "Do not be afraid, I am with you"? The search results loaded instantly. Dozens of sermons, hundreds of videos, verses, testimonies, all Christian, all pointing in one direction. And one verse appeared again and again, as if the world itself were trying to show me something. Isaiah 41:10. Fear not, for I am with you. Fear not, I am with you. The same words, the same promise, the same voice. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with something I had never felt in all my years of perfect ritual and memorized prayers. A warmth, a pull, as if someone were reaching toward me through the screen. I clicked one video, then another, Stories of men and women who had encountered Jesus, not in rituals, not in repetition, but in moments that felt alive, personal, intimate. Their words stirred something deep inside me, something I didn't have a name for, something that felt frightening and familiar all at once. For the first time in my life, I felt seen, and it terrified me more than the turbulence ever had, because it felt real. I closed my browser only when the call to prayer echoed faintly across the city, its sound hollow compared to the whisper I had heard in the sky. I lay awake until dawn, eyes burning, heart racing with questions I could no longer silence. Something had awakened that night. A door had opened that I couldn't close. And I knew with absolute certainty, I could never unhear that voice. I didn't tell a soul about the voice. Not my guardian. Not my parents. Not a single person in the palace that watched my every move. But inside me, something had shifted. Quietly, dangerously, irreversibly. For the next 6 months, I lived 2 lives. By day, I was Princess Laila bint Fahd. Poised, obedient, controlled, predictable. I attended royal functions, recited memorized prayers, smiled when expected, remained silent when required. But by night, I became someone else entirely. As soon as my bedroom door clicked shut, I locked it, drew the curtains tight, and opened the hidden browser on my phone, the one that bypassed palace filters and left no trace in the monitored history. There, in the secrecy of my room, I downloaded everything I could find without triggering suspicion. Audio Bibles whispered softly into the dark, Christian worship songs in English and Arabic, testimonies from former Muslims, sermons about a God who knew his children by name. I would lie on my bed with earphones pressed deep into my ears, listening to stories of people who had encountered Jesus not as an idea, not as a distant figure, but as a living presence, a savior who stepped into their fear, into their pain, into their longing. Night after night, I devoured every word. It felt like drinking water after years of thirst I hadn't understood. The emptiness I had carried since childhood, the hollow ache beneath all the rituals, began to shift. Fear slowly unraveled into something softer. The loneliness that once clung to me like a second skin started dissolving into warmth. And the rigid pressure of religious duty, the suffocating weight of perfection, melted into something I barely recognized. Grace. Unearned. Undeserved. Beautiful. For the first time in my life, I felt loved, not for my bloodline, not for my obedience, not for my flawless recitations, but for my heart. My flawed, questioning, restless heart. But with that love came tension. Because the more I learned, the more impossible it became to ignore the truth forming inside me. I wanted him. Not the rituals. Not the expectations. Him. And that desire frightened me more than the turbulence ever had, because I knew what it could cost. In my kingdom, discovering Jesus was dangerous. But loving him, that was treason. Still, the hunger only grew. The turning point came late one night, 3 months after the whisper in the sky. I had been listening to an Arabic sermon about the love of Christ, a love that pursued, rescued, redeemed, a love that crossed impossible distances just to touch a single heart. The words pierced me so deeply I had to pause the audio. My hands shook as I stood, walking into my private bathroom, the only room without cameras, the only place I could kneel without someone questioning why. The marble floor was cold beneath my knees as I sunk down, hands trembling, heart pounding so loudly I thought it might wake the entire palace. My voice came out barely above a whisper. Jesus, if you are real, if you are the one who spoke to me, I give you my heart. The moment the words left my lips, the air in the room shifted. A warmth, soft, radiant, impossibly gentle, filled the space around me, as if sunlight were pouring in from a window that didn't exist. Every hair on my arms lifted. My breath caught. My chest flooded with peace so deep it stole my ability to speak. I wasn't alone. I knew it. I felt it. Something holy, something alive, something unmistakably loving wrapped around me like an embrace. And in that moment, on the cold marble floor of a hidden bathroom in the heart of the Saudi royal palace, I understood. I had crossed an invisible line. A line that could cost me everything. My title, my family, my life, but I did not regret it. Because for the first time, I wasn't lost anymore. There was no turning back. If accepting Jesus felt like stepping into light, then what followed felt like fire. A burning I couldn't ignore, a burden I couldn't silence. Because once I knew him, once I felt that warmth flood my spirit, I couldn't keep him hidden behind locked doors and midnight searches and whispered prayers on marble floors. Love doesn't stay quiet. Truth doesn't stay caged. And my heart refused to stay silent. It started small, almost timid. I downloaded an encrypted messaging app, one designed for activists and journalists, and created a nameless, faceless profile. No photos, no voice notes, no traceable information. Then, one night, with trembling fingers, I sent my first message to 4 former university friends, women who had once confided their own spiritual hunger to me, long before I understood mine. Just one verse, just one seed. Fear not, for I am with you. I didn't sign it. I didn't explain it. I simply sent it and closed my phone, heart racing as if I had just committed treason, because in my kingdom, I had. But something unexpected happened. One of them replied with a single emoji, a tear. Another wrote, "Whoever you are, thank you. I needed this today." And that was all it took. The fire grew. Night after night, after the palace went silent, I recorded short audio devotionals, using a software that distorted my voice into something unrecognizable. I whispered about the love of Jesus, about the peace I had found, about the voice that had calmed the storm at 30,000 feet. My 4 friends began inviting others. 4 became 18. 18 became 30. 30 became 50. Women from Riyadh, Jeddah, Medina, even smaller towns I'd never heard of, whispering in the dark with earphones tucked beneath their veils, listening to the gospel in a kingdom where such words could cost them their lives. We needed a name. Something symbolic. Something discreet. We chose the Well of Life. Because in a land of deserts, physical and spiritual, we had found water. Our gatherings were as secret as they were sacred. We met through encrypted voice calls, always with cameras off, always speaking in hushed tones. We studied fragments of the Book of John, downloaded in pieces small enough to avoid detection. We prayed together, crying silently so our families wouldn't hear. We performed spiritual baptisms through words and intention alone, promising that one day, when safety allowed, we would make them physical. It was beautiful. It was dangerous. It was holy. But the more our group grew, the heavier the air felt around us, as if the shadows themselves were listening. Sometimes, during our nightly sessions, someone new would join but stay silent, their microphone muted for the entire hour. Sometimes a question would be asked that felt too precise, too probing, too much like someone taking notes. And every once in a while, a profile would disappear without warning. Deleted. Gone. No trace. The others thought these women simply lost courage, or got busy, or retreated into fear. But deep in my chest, a warning stirred. One of us was not who she claimed to be. I didn't know who. I didn't know when she had joined. But the feeling sat like a stone in my stomach, a silent, unseen threat pressing tighter with each passing night. Still, I pressed on. We all did. Because the truth is this: once you taste freedom, you cannot return to chains. And though I didn't realize it then, the walls of the palace were already shifting around me. The shadows were closing in. And the betrayal, the one that would shatter everything, was already set in motion. 12th February, 2021 began like any other day inside the palace. Quiet, predictable, suffocatingly ordinary. I woke before sunrise, performed the rituals expected of me, and spent the morning pretending my life was still my own. But by evening, the air felt strange, heavy, too still, as if the marble floors themselves were waiting. I didn't know it then, but the walls that had been closing in for months were finally ready to swallow me whole. It happened just after dusk. I had finished sending a short devotional to our group, a verse from John about the light that darkness cannot overcome, when the sound of footsteps thundered down the corridor outside my room. Not ordinary footsteps. Boots. Many of them. My heart froze. The door burst open without warning. My uncle, a senior minister in the kingdom, stepped inside first, face carved from stone, eyes cold enough to pierce through bone. Behind him spilled 6 officers from the Committee for the Promotion of Virtue and Prevention of Vice, the religious police every citizen feared, but few ever saw this close. I didn't even have time to stand. "Lila," my uncle said, voice sharp as glass, "you are under investigation for apostasy and subversion." He lifted his phone. On the screen were screenshots. Dozens of them. Every verse I had shared. Every prayer. Every message I had sent through encrypted channels. Even the voice devotionals I had disguised. Every secret I thought was hidden was suddenly staring back at me in cold, glowing clarity. Behind my uncle, my mother appeared, her face white, trembling, her hand pressed to her mouth. When she saw the messages, her knees buckled. She collapsed to the ground with a small, broken sound I had never heard from her before. My father entered moments later, his expression rigid, unreadable, but he didn't look at me. Not once. Not even when I whispered, "Baba, please." Silence. That silence pierced deeper than any blade ever could. The officers swarmed me. I didn't resist. What would resistance change? What would fighting do? My fate had already been decided the moment the first seed of truth left my lips months before. One officer yanked the veil from my head. Another twisted my wrists behind my back and bound them in rough, unyielding rope. My feet scraped painfully against the marble as they dragged me through the doorway, barefoot, disoriented, humiliated, a spectacle I had watched happen to others but never imagined would happen to me. The palace guards who once followed me like shadows now looked away, as if I were a stranger contaminating their path. No one spoke. No one intervened. No one dared. The palace gates groaned open, their towering iron bars swallowing me as I was forced outside. The desert night was cold, the wind slicing through the thin fabric of my abaya, but the cold inside me was far worse. At the transport van, an officer shoved me forward. I stumbled, hit the metal floor hard, and the door slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed like a death sentence. Princess Laila bint Fahd was gone. When the van began moving, the officer across from me tapped a clipboard and said without emotion, "Prisoner number 8814. A number. Stripped of name, title, identity. Reduced to a string of digits in a kingdom where my bloodline once meant everything." As we drove into the darkness, I realized it wasn't the chains biting into my wrists that hurt the most. It wasn't the fear of what awaited me. It wasn't even the possibility of death. It was the betrayal, the quiet, devastating truth that the people who raised me, protected me, loved me, had delivered me into the hands of the very system I had once served. And in the hollow silence of that betrayal, I understood something I had never grasped before. Chains weigh less than a broken heart. Prison swallowed time. Days dissolved into nights, nights into something darker, a silence so thick it clung to my skin like humidity. For 2 months, I lived in solitary confinement, a concrete box with no windows, no sound except my own breathing, and no company except the distant echo of doors slamming somewhere far down the corridor. The interrogations came constantly, sometimes twice a day, sometimes in the dead of night, always with the same questions, the same accusations, the same threats sharpened like knives. Who recruited you? Who are the others? Who gave you the Bible? Why have you abandoned the faith of your ancestors? And then the most venomous one. Do you understand the punishment for apostasy? I answered with silence at first, then with scripture, then with the truth. They didn't like any of those. The pressure to recant grew more relentless with each passing week. Sleep deprivation, isolation, endless promises of freedom if I would just say the one sentence that would erase everything I had discovered, everything I had become. Just recite the Shahada. Just say the words. Just undo your betrayal. But the truth was simple. I could not speak allegiance to a God who had never spoken back to me. Not after hearing the voice that called my name in the storm. The Imam visited me often, a man cloaked in a softness that felt rehearsed, offering tea I never drank and mercy I didn't trust. My daughter, he would say gently, as if tenderness could mask the blade beneath his words. Allah is forgiving. Recant, and you will live. Your family will welcome you home. Your honor will be restored. Then the tone would shift. Refuse, and you will die a death reserved for traitors. Death wasn't what frightened me. It was the thought of dying alone, with no one to hold my hand, no one to speak my name, no one to say I mattered. I prayed silently in those moments, not for escape, not for miracle, but for presence. For Jesus to stay in the cell with me the way he had stayed with me on the airplane, filling the chaos with peace. But heaven stayed quiet. Not absent. Just quiet. Like breath held in the dark. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon. Two guards escorted me into a small concrete room. No windows, no furniture, just a single table and 3 officials who didn't look me in the eyes. My uncle wasn't among them. That somehow hurt more than I expected. The eldest official cleared his throat and read from a stamped document, his voice flat, emotionless, as if announcing a weather report. By order of the High Religious Court, you are hereby sentenced to execution by sword on 4th April, 2021, for crimes of apostasy, evangelistic activity, and inciting the spread of Christianity within the kingdom. Another official added, almost mechanically, may your death deter others. Then they dismissed me as if I were a formality they were eager to finish. As the guards led me back down the hall, a strange calm settled over me. I wasn't afraid of the sword. Not anymore. I knew where I was going after it fell. But I was afraid of walking toward that moment alone. Afraid of my final breath echoing in an empty chamber. Afraid that no one would know how deeply I had loved Jesus. How fiercely I had held on, even when the world demanded I let go. Back in my cell, I curled onto the thin mattress and pressed my forehead to my knees. Tears came silently, not for myself, but for the others, the women still searching in the dark the way I once had. The psychological weight pressed heavy, like invisible hands tightening around my ribs. This was the cost of truth. This was the price of freedom. This was the punishment for choosing light in a kingdom built on shadows. And yet, in the quiet that night, beneath all the fear, beneath all the ache, one certainty burned steady and unwavering. If the sword was the path I had to walk, I would walk it, but I would not walk it without him. 3rd April, 2021. My final night on earth. The air in my cell was heavier than ever, thick with the scent of metal and dust, and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights that never turned off. Somewhere down the corridor, a door slammed, and the echo rolled through the prison like distant thunder. I sat on my mattress, legs drawn to my chest, listening to the ticking in my own pulse. They had told me to prepare myself. Tomorrow morning, at sunrise, I would be taken to the courtyard. By noon, my story would end. But death wasn't what terrified me anymore. It was the thought that I would cross that threshold alone. That the voice I once heard on the airplane, the one who found me in the dark, might not come again. I pressed my palms together and whispered, my words trembling in the stillness. Jesus, I'm not asking you to stop what's coming. Just don't leave me now. If I must walk through death, let me know you are here. The silence after that prayer was unbearable, so deep it felt alive. I cried until I couldn't anymore, until my tears turned to quiet breathing and the world slipped into half-dream. Then, at 2:17 a.m., everything changed. A soft wind moved through the cell, though there were no windows, no vents, no reason. The air shimmered, and suddenly the walls seemed to breathe. Light began to glow from the corners of the room, not blinding, not harsh, but warm, like sunlight filtered through water. It wrapped around me, gentle and alive, as if invisible arms had drawn me close. And then came the voice, the same one from the storm. Calm, steady, familiar. Lila, my daughter, your work is not finished. Every hair on my skin lifted. The warmth deepened, and something clicked, a metallic sound from the door. The lock had opened. I stood slowly, heart racing. The door creaked outward on its own. Beyond it, the hallway was swallowed in darkness. Every fluorescent bulb had gone black. For a moment, I froze, unsure if I was dreaming or alive in a miracle. But then the voice spoke again, quieter this time. Walk. So I did. My bare feet met cold concrete. The silence was absolute. Every few steps, a faint pulse of warmth would move ahead of me, guiding me like a whisper made of light. When I passed the security station, I saw the monitors, every camera feed frozen mid-frame. Guards sat slumped at their desks, heads bowed in unnatural sleep. Not one stirred as I moved past. Each corridor opened before me as if the building itself had decided to help. Every locked door released with a click. Every checkpoint light flickered green. When I reached the main gate, my courage faltered. It was sealed by biometric scanner, a system even royal guards couldn't bypass. Lord, I whispered, voice breaking, if this is you, I need you now. The machine beeped. Then, impossibly, the gate began to open, its heavy metal groaning against the night. Outside, the desert air hit my face, sharp, cold, alive. A white maintenance van idled a few meters away, its headlights dimmed. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out, wrapped in a scarf, her eyes calm but urgent. Jesus sent me, she said softly. I was told to drive. I stared at her, speechless. Before I could ask her name, she opened the passenger door. Please, she said. Now. I climbed in. The van rolled forward, tires crunching over gravel, leaving behind the walls that had held me captive. In the rearview mirror, the prison shrank into darkness, a fortress fading into sand. I pressed my hand over my heart. The warmth was still there. The voice lingered, like an echo inside my chest. Your work is not finished. And for the first time in months, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't. The first thing I remember about freedom was the sound of the sea. Waves crashing against the shore, a rhythm too wild to be contained, so different from the sterile silence of the palace, or the suffocating stillness of my cell. It was Spain, southern coast. The woman who had driven me never gave her name. She left me with a passport, a ticket, and a quiet blessing. By the time I stepped into asylum housing 2 weeks later, the world believed Princess Lila bint Fahd was dead. And maybe she was. Because the woman who walked out of that prison was no longer the same. I wasn't royalty anymore. I wasn't a secret prisoner. I wasn't a number. I was something new, someone reborn between sword and salvation. In Spain, I found refuge under a program for persecuted believers. The first nights were strange. I wasn't used to silence that wasn't dangerous, or walking outside without guards trailing behind. Freedom was loud, colorful, messy, and I was terrified of it. But slowly, the fear began to loosen. The same voice that had led me out of the cell kept leading me still, this time, not through locked gates, but through the brokenness inside my heart. I began to meet others, refugees, exiles, former Muslims who had also heard the call of Jesus in deserts, in dreams, in secret rooms like mine. At first, we met in a tiny apartment by the coast, 5 of us sitting on the floor, reading from the book of John in Arabic, whispering prayers so the neighbors wouldn't hear. We called ourselves the Well of Life. That same name I had once whispered in Saudi Arabia, now alive again, spreading quietly like water through dry land. 5 became 50. 50 became 500. Soon, there were thousands, men and women across the Middle East, hidden yet unshaken, meeting online under false names, lifting hands to a savior they'd once been forbidden to speak of. And through it all, I felt something healing inside me. Not just the memory of chains breaking, but the realization that my suffering had been seed, planted deep, watered with tears, now growing into something I could never have planned. The world thinks I am gone. My family held a private burial in Riyadh. They mourned a daughter who no longer exists. And in a way, they were right. That old version of me did die. But the woman I am now, she lives more fiercely than ever. Sometimes, I walk along the coastline and whisper the words that started it all. Fear not, for I am with you. The same words that once glowed on a forbidden screen now pulse in my veins like a heartbeat. I've seen too much to doubt anymore. Too much light in too much darkness. Too much grace in places where hope should not survive. And so I tell my story, not for sympathy, not for fame, but for someone else sitting in their own kind of cell, thinking God has forgotten them. He hasn't. He never will. Because Jesus didn't just save my life. He redeemed my destiny. He took a silenced princess and made her a messenger. He turned my prison into a pulpit, my shame into testimony, my death sentence into a beginning. And now, when I lift my voice to speak, it's not fear that echoes back. It's freedom. It's purpose. It's love strong enough to break any chain. This is not the end of my story. It's the beginning of his. Thank you for staying to the end. I really appreciate. Always remember Jesus is Lord. Please do well to subscribe, like, share and comment. God bless you.